Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to take a look at Crayola Super Tips washable markers. I do already have an older video on using these pens, but this time I'm going to try and use them as watercolors. So I have some watercolor paper here. I'm showing this on camera so you guys can see which one I'm using. And these are the Crayola Super Tip markers that I have. I have the 50 set here. So on my last video, quite a lot of people commented letting me know that these can be used as watercolors. And in this video, I've finally got around to testing that out. I'm taking a clip from that video here, just to show you the colour swatch I made so that I don't have to make it again. I will put a link in the description box below the video, for those of you that want to check out my original video. This first bit here, this is just me drawing straight onto the page, adding some water to see what happened basically. And it worked quite well, it gives a very strong effect. And in this second one, I do the same thing, but instead of blocking in a full area, I leave some gaps between it. So it's just a few lines, just to see if I could use the same effect, but get a slightly weaker colour. And it did, it worked well for that. The next one was just me testing blending the colours. I picked up a random green and a random yellow, but as you can tell, it looked more like a highlighter or something, that yellow. So I ended up just testing it again with two different greens, just in case there is anything different about that marker. So I just put down two different shades of green next to each other, again with gaps between them. I could work the water into this more, probably to get a flatter look and remove the lines that you can still see. But this really is just a test page for me to see how they can be used as watercolours, just playing around and experimenting. This next one over on the left, I started with a red, I then went to a blue, green. I was basically just picking out a selection of random colours, basically just making a mess with them, blocking them all in, not leaving any gaps. And then I take my brush full of water and literally just paint over it. I don't even blend them in that well. I don't really know what kind of effect I was trying to achieve with this. I'm not sure how you would use this, but there it is. Maybe you could use it for a galaxy or something. Which brings me on to the next one. I wanted to test out the black to see how dark it actually goes. And you can tell that as soon as you apply water, obviously you get a nice grey as well. I'm not sure how well it shows up on camera, but as you lighten this black with water, you do see some blue hues in there. The flat red colour that I've put down there, I'm going to test by layering it up. So I block that in and then I go over it with some water, and I'm going to come back to it once that's dried. You might notice as well that water does weaken the strength of the colour a little bit. To the right of that, I'm going to do something very similar to test the layering again. So I put down two swatches of pink. One of them I'm going to put water over it now, and I'm going to come back to once it's dry and add some purple over one side of it. The other one I haven't added the water to yet, but I'm putting the purple on one side and then I'm going over it with water. So we'll come back to that in a second and compare them. Next, I decided I would put some water down on the page and then go over it with a pink to see what kind of effect that gave me. To be honest, that didn't work too well. I even tried doing it with a little bit less water, but to be honest, neither of those really worked. And this technique here is a pretty cool one. I've seen this in other people's videos. So basically, as long as you have the right kind of surface, like this plastic palette here, you can draw into them, get some of the ink out of the pen, then simply add a bit of water to your brush and use them as you would with a regular watercolour. Personally, I would say this is the closest technique to regular watercolours, and I quite like the effect it gave as well, but it is quite weak in colour compared to drawing straight on. Next, I'm using the palette again just to see if I can mix colours easily in it. They did mix. I used a blue and a red, but it turned quite mucky and looks almost, well, it looks brown. So I'm going to try again with a red and a yellow just to see if we can get a little bit of orange. Again, I would say it's a little bit mucky compared to the colours used, but it probably depends what colours you use. I'm going back to that red now. It has dried, so I go over it with another layer of the same red. It works quite well with the marker over the top with the second layer, even if you don't go over it with water again. So there's a few more options there. And now that our pink has dried, I'm adding a little bit of purple and going over that with water again. And you can see that with the one we did earlier, just to compare. And because I had a little bit of space left, I just wanted to try that same thing, that random doodle, let's call it, applying lots of different colours and seeing what happens. This time I left a little bit of a gap between them and didn't use colours that were as far from one another, so probably a little bit closer on the colour wheel. And then I go over these and blend them in softly. I don't really know what I was going for, and again it does look a little bit mucky, but I am sure people could find a way to use this somehow, if they spent more time on it than me anyway. And last of all, I just decided to pick up my Jelly Roll pen to go over the black just to see if you can get a sort of star effect, make it into a galaxy type scene. In fact, I threw a little bit of purple on the edges and added a bit of water, but what I found this time is that the blue in the black actually came out a little bit and went over the purple, so you can't even really tell. Okay, so that is my random sheet of experiments, let's call it. It's always good just to have a bit of a play around with something if you've not used it before. I'm just showing you the back of the page there to show that none of it actually went through, which is always good. You guys who watch my videos know that once I've tested a product, I try to do a little bit of a demo at the end. The first thing I'm going to point out is even regular watercolours are definitely not my strong point. So I was a little bit nervous going in with this. I couldn't decide what to draw for a while. I settled on just drawing an eye, but figured I would try and make it a little bit more rainbowy, try and get a lot of hues in there, a lot of colours in there. So the challenging aspect in this for me was actually getting them all to blend into one another quite nicely. Another thing to note is that I don't tape my watercolour paper down or anything like that. I know you guys who are really good with watercolour would definitely advise that. For me, this was just a bit of a quicker painting. Whilst I think the process is quicker to actually apply the pen to the paper first and then add the water, I wanted to start light, so I decided I would use the palette technique again and use my brush just to get a base layer in there. And then I would gradually go in a little bit darker, bit by bit. Sometimes using the palette, sometimes using a little bit of the pen on paper and adding the water afterwards. So I'm working from lights to dark, because once you apply your darks, it's going to be very difficult to make it lighter again. Whereas once you've got your lights down, you can always go darker. In the iris that you're watching here, I only ended up getting two colours in, pretty much blues and greens. I was trying to go blue, sort of turquoisey, then green, but I think I kind of blended out between them, or even blended out the blue. So I figured I'd stick with these colours for the iris, and then I would use the other colours around the eye for the skin. As mentioned earlier, it's going to be difficult to get the paler areas in again, so where I wanted a highlight on the eye, I left completely white. That's the bit in the top left corner. Obviously the centre of the eye, I am actually going to paint black. And I did use my black watered down just to get a very subtle grey for the white of the eye. And you'll see at the end of it, it is quite messy. I think you guys could probably do a better job than I did. The total time of this I think was about an hour. So as mentioned, you can see I'm using a lot of purple for the skin around the eye. I started adding a little bit of blue towards the top of the eye, or the skin around the eye, and tried to make it a little bit more red towards the bottom left hand side, I think it was. In other words, for this one I wanted to try and add more colours in so that I was using more of the pencils, getting more of the experience, let's call it, of this experiment. And I see a lot of watercolour paintings where people draw like drips coming down. Because of the methods I was using here, I couldn't do these organically by letting the water actually drip down. So I actually just paint these on by hand, so they do look quite messy. But to be honest, for an hour's work for me in a medium that I'm not very comfortable with, trying something new, it could have definitely gone worse. I almost went for drawing a unicorn, but instead I decided I would play it safe and try to draw an eye. If you look online, you'll see that watercolour in like a rainbow effect for an eye is something that's quite popular. I've got most of my colours down at this point, but I didn't have many reds in, so I tried to go over it a little bit more with a few pinks and reds on the left hand side, because the whole point of this for me was to mix and use different colours. And once I got a little bit of yellow in the eye to finish it off, I was happy with the actual colours on this, which meant I could finally go in now with a black to add in the pupil and an eyelash. So instead of going straight in and drawing the eyelashes, I wanted to darken the whole area as well, the edge of the lid, to give the impression of a little bit of shadow and to make it feel a little bit more natural. So this first layer is me adding the black and going over it with a bit of water. On the pupil, I did have to go over it with a few layers to get an actual black because it was coming out quite weak, quite grey at first. And I accidentally mixed a few of the greens and blues out of the iris into the white of the eye. Luckily I could get away with it on a piece like this. And we're on to the last few touches now, and this is where I started adding the eyelashes. Sometimes I find adding the eyelashes can be quite difficult to make realistic, but for whatever reason they went on quite well this time. I tried to keep them bunched up. I did load up reference for this as well, just to try and keep it as neat as I could. And the finishing touches that I wanted to add to this, I actually picked up a Crayola black pencil colour. My thinking here was I'd be able to neaten the edges and darken certain areas like the creases in the skin, but to be honest, this pencil was just not dark enough compared to the markers that I'd used, so it's not very visible. Anyway, there it is finished. Please do check out my other video where I go into more detail about the price of these pens. They are only cheap pens. I'm pretty sure they're aimed at kids. They're not an alternative to alcohol markers like Copic or anything like that. I wasn't impressed with them at all in my last video. I'll put a picture on screen of how that one turned out, but that was because of the paper I used and the method I used to colour. I definitely think they have potential to be used as watercolours though. As already mentioned, I'm not great with watercolours, but I would imagine someone who is can do something really good with these. And it's quite fun to try. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave me a comment below, let me know what other videos you want to see next. And as always, make sure you subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching everyone.